Hey guys, how's it going? Rum Gaming here. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Arcane Mage, some of their strengths, weaknesses, what they bring to the table, why you might want to play them. We're going to go over rotation, stat priority. We're going to go over enchants, gems, consumables, all that good stuff. So if this is something that you're interested in, feel free to stick around and we'll go over here shortly. All right, so a quick overview of what Arcane Mage even is. So Arcane Mage is very cooldown reliant. We have a management system. We have an arcane charge system. And typically our DPS is broken into two phases. We have the burn phase and we have the conserve phase. And then in between there's a mini burn phase. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit more once we get into the rotation. And this class also seems to be reworked a lot. It's kind of struggled in the past, kind of finding its place in the meta, and in my opinion, it's in a pretty good spot right now. Typically from season to season, we have seen them as like C and D tier, and it's just constantly getting changed, constantly getting reworked. But from my experience so far throughout the season, it has been in a pretty decent spot. So we're very cooldown reliant. Most of your damage is going to be from those big cooldowns. It's going to fall into those windows in those kind of burn phases. And we also have a management system, a mana management system. So typically you don't see that in DPS classes. You're not having to manage any sort of mana. You typically only see that with healers. So that's where some of the uniqueness comes in for Arcane Mage. You have this mana bar, and once you run out of mana, you run out of damage essentially. So that's something that you will have to manage over the course of your rotation. You do have a lot of spells like evocation and tools to kind of regenerate some of that mana. It's also built into our mastery. We'll talk about that here in a bit. And then we also have an arcane charge system. So the way it works is you build up arcane charges through arcane explosion and arcane blast, and then you can spend those charges on other spells to do more damage, almost like a combo point system, but a little bit different. We'll kind of cover that here in a minute. All right, so I tried to kind of move myself around here as best I could, put myself in the bottom right-hand corner so you can see the spells that we have on the screen, right? So for offensive cooldowns, some of your major cooldowns are going to be Evocation, Arcane Surge, Radiant Spark, and Touch of the Magi. So starting out here with Evocation, basically this is going to allow you to regenerate your mana quickly. That's going to be one of your main offensive cooldowns. We also have Arcane Surge. So what this is going to do is going to take your current mana and it's going to transfer that into damage. So more mana spent equals more damage done. So if you have a full mana bar and you cast this at the start of your rotation, which we do a lot of the times, you're going to be getting more value out of the spell. We also have Radiant Spark and Touch of the Magi. These are going to be on a little bit shorter cooldown. I want to say 30 and 45 seconds. So this will be kind of your mini burst. So Radiant Spark has a stacking effect associated with it. And I believe it has 4 stacks. And each spell you do, or each spell you cast on each stack will do additional damage. So once you've casted, I believe those 4 spells, the 4 stacks will go away. And you'll just be doing normal damage after that. And then we also have Touch of the Magi, which it's like a dot that you put on the target. It's going to absorb the damage that you do, and it's going to burst back out onto that target and to, I believe, I want to say up to 8 enemies around it. We'll double check that here in a bit. But for now, that's your major offensive cooldowns. So for your major defensive and utility cooldowns, we have Ice Cold, and this is going to replace your Ice Block. If you're familiar with Ice Block for mages, it's going to encase you in this block of ice, and you are completely immune in it. The downside of it is you can't do damage while you're in that block of ice. So this is why Ice Cold kind of comes in. It's going to reduce damage taken by 70% and completely replace the Ice Block ability. We also have a greater invisibility, which will reduce the damage you take by 60% when you pop it. So this is great for just random defensive utility. We also have Time Warp. If you're not familiar with this, this is going to give you a large group haste buff. This is the biggest cooldown that you have in your kit, and it's one reason that a lot of people invite mages to their groups because of this ability right here. If you've ever heard of Bloodlust or Heroism, it's the exact same thing. This is just the mage specific ability. So just make sure that you're really coordinating this with your group, because it will put a 10-minute debuff on you and your entire party when you use it. Even if you have another shaman in your group who has Bloodlust, he can't use it for 10 minutes because you used your time warp. So make sure you hold on to that one. And then finally, we have Mirror Image. This is going to make a copy or clone of yourself. And really the main part of this is the flat damage reduction. So it's going to reduce the damage that you take by 20%. All right, then for stat priority, we have Mastery at the top. We have a Critical Strike below it, and then Haste and Versatility at the very bottom. So the reason that Mastery is so strong is actually due to a talent. It's not necessarily due to our straight Mastery, but our straight Mastery is really good, right? So just reading it out, our Mastery by itself increases your mana regeneration rate and your maximum mana by 9.6%. Arcane Charges increase the damage of Arcane Blast by an additional 4% and Arcane Barrage by 2%. And this is going to increase all other arcane damage by 8%. So that is really strong, especially in Raid. However, what makes this absolutely without a doubt the number one stat priority below Intellect is Talent below in the bottom left, Prodigious Savant. So Arcane Charge further increases the mastery of effectiveness of Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage by 20%. So that is per Arcane Charge. So each charge that you have, you're going to get 20% more effectiveness to your mastery. So obviously, the mana regen from mastery is going to be really good. And extended fights, which is where raid, where we find raid bosses, 4 or 5 minutes per boss, right? Even longer in some cases. So that's why our mastery is so strong for raid. We get increased mana regen, and then also just the flat damage increase from arcane charges on our Arcane Blast. And then in Mythic Plus, this does change a little bit. Critical Strike and Versatility are going to scale more for us on large mob packs, more than our Mastery will. And then also the flat mana regen that we're getting from our Mastery is not quite as important in Mythic Plus because we're typically able to sustain our mana with our cooldowns like Evocation. All right, now let's talk about our tier set just a little bit before we get into the rotation. So our tier set works on a spell called Clear Casting. So based on mana spent, you have a chance to get a free Arcane Missile or Arcane Explosion. So going into our 2-piece here, Consuming Clear Casting increases spell damage by 2% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 10% total. So this is really good because it doesn't change our rotation in any way. All you need to do is when Clear Casting comes up, you just want to make sure that you are consuming that. And again, you can consume Clear Casting through Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion. So then going into our 4-piece here, after consuming Clear Casting 3 times, your next Arcane Missiles deals 150% increased damage to your primary target and 100% damage up to 4 enemies near your target. So, our 4-piece is really good for single target. It's also really good for AoE. So very simple, very straightforward tier set. Does a lot of damage. I recommend getting your tier piece on all classes, right, as fast as you possibly can. And then also when we get into the rotation, I'll show you what it looks like to get a Clear Casting proc, but essentially it's going to be these 2 purple bars that pop up on your screen, and that's going to let you know that you have a Clear Casting effect that you can consume. All right, then for raid talents, you can see here, this is coming directly from Method's website, so I don't like to recommend talents unless somebody better than me is recommending them. So these will be your raid single target talents for 10.2 Season 3. And these will be your Mythic Plus and AoE talents for 10.2 Season 3 as well. I'll put a link in the description below where you can copy those over, but we'll kind of talk about some of these talents here in just a bit. All right, then if you are pushing a little bit higher content and you're wanting to get into raids and you're wanting to do Mythic Plus, you're going to want Enchants on your gear. So Enchants, you can almost, I think everything here, you can buy it from the auction house. So just go to the auction house, Some of these can be expensive. I think specifically the leg enchant temporal spell thread, you're going to be spending 10,000-20,000 gold on that. And probably the enchant weapon Sophic Devotion will be pretty expensive. But just to kind of go through the list here, you're going to be stacking a lot of avoidance. You're going to have avoidance on your wrists as well as your cloak. We have main stat on the chest, waking stats. And then we have critical strike on the rings. And on the legs, of course, you're going to have temporal spell thread. And then on your belt, you're going to do a shadowed belt clasp, which is going to put a gem socket in your belt. So speaking of gems, we're going to be getting the skillful elemented diamond or the inscribed elemented diamond. All right, so for gems and consumables, we're going to be running skillful diamond or inscribed diamond. It really depends on what type of content you are running. You're going to run skillful for raid, and you're going to run inscribed for Mythic Plus. So inscribed is going to give main stat and crit, and then skillful is going to give, I believe it's a mastery and main stat. For potions, we're going to be running Elemental Potion of Power. This is going to give you a huge main stat increase for 30 seconds. It's on like a 5 or 6 minute cooldown, and they're pretty expensive to run, so you only want to be using those in difficult content. We have a new healing potion as well, the Dreamwalker's Healing Potion, so you can pick those up on the auction house. You want to have at least a stack or two of those on you at all times. And then in terms of the flasks, we have Phials, which replace flasks from previous expansions. And then we also have Phials here, so you can kind of use what you want. It depends on your play style. We have the Phial of Corrupting Rage. So the way that this is going to work is you're going to take X amount of damage. And after you take X amount of damage, you're going to take 25% increased damage. So that's kind of the con of this. The pro of this is it gives you like 1,000 critical strike. So this is, again, this is going to be our best option for damage. But at the same time, you're going to be taking more damage. So it's kind of that high risk, high reward play style. If you have a lot of faith in your healers, you can run it. I don't like to run it. I don't like to put extra pressure on my healers. And then we have Elemental of Chaos, and we have Tepid Versatility. I like to take Versatility because it is a little bit more consistent in Mythic Plus content. But if you are raiding, Versatility is not as good of a stat. So if you want sort of that safe option for raiding, you can go the Phial of Elemental Chaos. All right, so the way that the rotation is going to work is you're going to start with Evocation. And the reason you start with Evocation is due to Siphon Storm. So what this is going to do is increase your mana by 2% every 0.4 seconds of channel time. So that's a really strong buff to have at the start of your pool. It also lasts for 30 seconds, so this is something that you're going to want to keep up as often as possible. After that, right as the pool's happening, you'll want to have an Arcane Blast out. You'll want to throw out an Arcane Orb, and then you'll want to do a instant Nether Tempest. So Nether Tempest is going to be this ability, and you want to get that on the target as quickly as possible. So right as the pool is starting, right, you have an Arcane Blast and an Orb instantly going out, giving you 2 charges for a buffed Nether Tempest. All right, from here, you don't want to worry about anything else. You want to spam Arcane Blast to about 70% mana. And then from here, you're going to want to cast Radiant Spark. So that Radiant Spark works is it's going to put this stacking effect on the target, and it's going to basically buff the next 4 spells that hit that target by 10%. So one thing to note here is the effect ends after 4 spells. So you want to be very selective on which spells that you're buffing. So typically, what people recommend to do is cast Radiant Spark, and then use 3 Arcane Blasts on that Radiant Spark target. So that will put you at 1 stack left that will be buffed. 1 more ability can be buffed. So that last ability that you want to buff is going to be Arcane Surge. This is a very hard-hitting ability, and what it's going to do is it's going to consume your mana pool. So since you're sitting at 70% mana at this point, you're going to drop all the way down to 0. And then what it's going to do is it's going to increase your mana regeneration by 425%. and it's going to increase your spell damage by 35% for 15 seconds. Now, before you get the mana regeneration, it's going to dump your mana, and all that mana is turned into a big burst of damage. So that's why we want to buff this ability, because it's probably the hardest hitting ability that we have in our talent tree. So once you cast Arcane Surge, now you're sitting at 0% mana, but now we have this really big buff, right? We're getting huge mana regeneration, and we're also getting our spell damage increased by 30%, 35%. So the question here is, what do you want to do next? Because we have this 15-second window where we're really strong. So what do we want to do with that 15 seconds? So typically what you want to do is you're going to be sitting on 4 arcane charges. So you want to throw out an Arcane Barrage. It's a pretty hard-hitting ability. And what it's going to do is it's going to consume those 4 arcane charges that you built up. So once you send out that Arcane Barrage, now you're going to be sitting at 0 arcane charges. So that's kind of a problem. You don't really want to be sitting at 0 arcane charges when you have this huge, damage buff that we're getting from Arcane Surge. So what we do to compensate for that is we use Touch of the Magi, and what this is going to do is it's going to generate 4 arcane charges. What this is also going to do is this is going to accumulate 20% of the damage that you deal to that target for 12 seconds, and then it's going to explode for that 20% onto the target. So this really lines up pretty well with the 15-second buff that we're getting from Arcane Surge. So you have this 15-second window here where you're getting all these different buffs from different abilities. You're also within Siphon Storm. So we have these 3 talents that are working well together, and you want to utilize that 15 seconds as much as possible, because that is where most of your damage is going to be coming from, is this short 15-second window. So from here, that's considered your opener, right? So from here, you're going to want to be fishing for these Nether Precision procs. So what this is going to do is every time clear casting procs, you're going to consume that clear casting proc with an Arcane Missile. Once you consume that clear casting, your next 2 Arcane Blast will be increased by 20%. So what some people do is they actually shorten the cast time of Arcane Missiles. They kind of clip it. That way they can get back into casting Arcane Blast as quickly as possible, because that's where a majority of your damage is going to be coming from. It's not going to be coming from Arcane Missiles, especially if you're in that 15-second window. You don't want to be casting Arcane Missiles. You want to be using those hard-hitting Arcane Blasts as much as possible. So after all those big cooldowns are used, you'll want to use something here called Shifting Power. So what Shifting Power is going to do is this channeled ability, and each time a tick goes off on that ability, it's going to reduce the cooldown of your other mage abilities by 3.5 seconds. So to show you what that looks like really quick, it does this sort of pulsing damage, and if these abilities were on cooldown, you would see that they were reduced by 12 seconds. So I'd kind of consider that your burn phase, right? You're getting those 15-second windows, and you're spamming out Arcane Blast as much as possible while you have those 3 big buffs out. So that's your burn phase. You also have sort of a mini burn phase, and that's going to be where you're using Touch of the Magi and Radiant Spark together, because those are just on 45-second and 30-second cooldowns, versus something like Arcane Surge and Evocation, which are both on 1.5-minute cooldowns. All right, then from here, let's take a quick look at the rotation. So it's going to be, honestly, the Arcane opener is a little confusing at first, but once you do it a few times, it does get better. So the opener I'm going to use is coming from Method's website, and this was posted by Tamir, I guess is how you say it. So this is using his opener, so we'll get into that real quick. And then we'll look at the mini burn phase, and then fishing for these Nether Precision procs. All right, so at the start of the opener, like we said earlier, we're going to start with Evocation, and that's going to give us this Siphon Storm. So this is going to go pretty quick, so feel free to pause the video, feel free to rewind it. What we're going to do is we're going to start with Evocation here. We're going to channel it for Siphon Storm. We're going to do Arcane Blast into an Arcane Orb, into Nether Tempest. into Arcane Blast down to 70% mana, into Radiant Spark, into 1, 2, 3 Arcane Blast, into another Nether Tempest, into Arcane Surge, into Arcane Barrage, into Touch of the Magi, into more Arcane Blasts. And we're just spamming Arcane Blast while we have this Arcane Surge buff. Now, once you lose that buff, then you can go in here and you can use Clear Casting procs. When you get Clear Casting procs, that's going to give you 2 stacks of Nether Precision, which you can then use on follow-up Arcane Blasts. Now, from here, now that you're done with the opener, you can use Shifting Power when needed. That's going to reduce the cooldown on your abilities like Evocation and Arcane Surge by 12 seconds. All right, then from there, you're going to have sort of like a mini burn phase, and what you can use is Radiant Spark as well as Touch of the Magi. Those are on 30 seconds and 45-second cooldowns. So as those become available, you're going to weave those back into your rotation, and it's going to be very similar to what we just did earlier. Just think of it as, like a mini phase of what we just did, removing Arcane Surge and Evocation for Siphon Power. All right, so that single target AoE rotation is actually going to be the exact same, as a lot of our splash damage is going to come from Nether Tempest as well as Touch of the Magi. You'll still be using Arcane Blast because of the way that it works with Touch of the Magi. All right, so Touch of the Magi. All the damage that you do to that one singular target is then exploded out. So you want to be focusing as much damage as possible on that one specific mob, even in AoE scenarios. Then outside of that burst phase, we will be using Arcane Orbs a lot, and we will also be using Arcane Barrage, because we have a talent here called Orb Barrage. So Arcane Barrage has a 10% chance per Arcane Charge to launch an orb in front of you. So this is pretty satisfying to use, because what you can do is we can Arcane Orb up to 4 charges, and when we Arcane Barrage here, we have a 40% chance to throw out another Arcane Orb, which will generate additional Arcane Charges. So you kind of go into this phase of doing Arcane Orb into Arcane Barrage, just kind of going back and forth. If you don't get a proc, you can always use Arcane Explosion if needed. So just to kind of show you what this looks like, you're going to throw an orb out, you get 4 charges. From here, you can Arcane Barrage. So we didn't get another orb. So to build up those charges, we can Arcane Explosion again. And then we can dump into Arcane Barrage. Once again, we didn't get an orb. We could throw out another orb, use another charge, Arcane Barrage. Unlucky, we still didn't get another orb. Let's throw out another one. We're at 4 charges again. And right there, you can see we finally got an Arcane Orb proc. We're at 3 charges. Let's go ahead and Barrage again. We got another orb, which is really good. You see we keep getting these orbs. And then just to show you, let's assume... Okay, so here we are. We have no orbs. We have 0 charges. So how do we build up charges quickly with no orbs? You can use Arcane Explosion here to build up those charges quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you want to get back into that Arcane Barrage, Arcane Orb spam as much as you possibly can. All right, then one thing to note here for the consume phase, if you do run into an instance, right, where Arcane Surge, say it has like 1 minute left on its cooldown, Evocation has 1 minute left on its cooldown, and you're sitting at like 60% mana and you're burning through it very quickly, right? What do? So this is where you have now entered the conserve phase, and simply all you're going to want to do is when you get below 60% mana, so let's see if we can build up some quick charges here. So let's get to 60% mana. So let's assume Evocation's on cooldown. Let's assume Arcane Surge is on cooldown. So what you can do now is you want to dump your charges with Arcane Barrage. Now we're sitting at 0 charges, and now your Arcane Blast, they're going to hit, they're going to be less effective. They're not going to do as much damage, but they're going to cost less mana, and it's going to allow you to sustain your mana pool, and it's going to keep you from dropping to that 0 mana. So just to kind of touch there, on the conserve phase. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and we will see you all in the next one.